So I medically retired from the Army a year ago in July after 14 years of service. And I flew helicopters for 6.5 years, and then I did psychological operations for another 4. And oftentimes people ask me, so, why did you decide to go into aviation? Why did you always want to fly? And people would often think that this is a pretty logical story, like, oh, my dad flew or my mom flew, and I have always wanted to be a pilot. That's not the case. The story is that when I was in ROTC in college, we had an operations officer on staff, Major Agor, who was an Apache pilot. And there's a story, a joke about pilots that goes something like, how do you know that you're talking to a pilot? Well, they'll tell you. And Apache pilots will not only tell you once, but they'll tell you probably twice. They're very, very confident and proud of their airframe. So he was on staff, and one day I was a sophomore, and he was marching up and down the hallway saying really loudly, why hasn't a cadet from this university ever branched aviation? Aren't any of our cadets good enough? Well, Cadet Barlieb heard that sitting in the back of the classroom and set her sights on becoming good enough to get aviation. So I, just focused on getting the best PT score, the best grades. I did all the most, competitive things. I joined the Ranger Challenge team and competed. I went to jump school. I competed in marksmanship. I did all this stuff just to make sure that I could be good enough to get Army aviation. Now, what I failed to do was equate getting aviation to actually flying anything. And so when we submitted for our branches and finally got our selections, Major King called me up and he said, congratulations, cadet, you got aviation. What do you want to fly? And I was like, so thrilled over getting aviation, but I had never thought through really far enough about actually flying anything. And at the time, I didn't even know what aircraft were in the Army inventory. And so I said to Major King, I have no idea. Like, I don't have any idea. What are the options? And he was like, you're kidding me. I said, no. I said, I hadn't really, the goal was to get aviation, not anything beyond that. So before I could actually go down to Fort Rucker and start flight school, I don't know what the other services do, but in the Army, they take all your measurements, like from all your major joints, to make sure that you can fit in the cockpit and reach all the switches, for operations. So they take all my measurements, and my arm length, my arm width from end to end was too short, about a half an inch too short. So I had to go down to Fort Indian Town Gap and get what they call an in-cockpit flight evaluation. It was a very serious ordeal. I had to get up and dress up in my uniform, go down there. I met a flight examiner, very stoic, stern, serious face, and he explained to me the procedure and what was going to happen and what we were going to do. And so I said, okay, yes, sir. And I'm thinking, gosh, here it is. I have done all the right things, dotted all the I's, crossed the T's, got the best scores, and now here it is. There's nothing I can do to change my arm length. I can't study more. I can't go out and run a few extra miles. I can't become a vegetarian. There's nothing I can do about these measurements. And I thought, well, here we go. So I follow him out to the model aircraft. We strap in, and they have to simulate a crash sequence. So, your harness is locked in. And he had this pointer, and he said, okay, I'm going to point out the switches. You reach to them, and then I'll cross it off on the checklist here on the clipboard. So I said, okay. So he extends his pointer, and he's pointing out the switches, and I'm reaching them just fine. And then finally, there was one that was this cross cockpit reach where I had to reach across, and there was an emergency switch where you had to flip up this red handle and then turn a knob. And so he pointed to it. He said, you got to reach with your left arm across and reach that switch. So I'm reaching and reaching, and there is daylight between my fingertip and that switch. And I'm reaching and reaching. The harness is cutting into my shoulder. My feet are coming off the pedals. I start sweating down my back. I'm reaching and reaching. I exhale to kind of give me like an extra, like, still I'm feeling nothing on my fingertip. And all of a sudden, just when I'm about to lose all hope, I hear, "Good reach, cadet." And I looked over at him, and he didn't even look up from the clipboard, and I could hear the pen going across the paper. And he said, "Between you, me, and this clipboard, you reached that switch. Are we clear?" And I just thought, oh, this is unbelievable. I thought, okay. I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Very good." So he finishes up the paperwork. I hear his signature scratch across the paper. And we walk out to the front, and he slides the clipboard across the counter, pats me on the shoulder, and says, "She's good to go. Let's, send her off, let her get her wings, and get her to wherever she needs to be." The reason I share that story is because later, fast forward 10 years later, I went and I deployed to Iraq. I flew the Kiowa Warrior, which is the Army's scout attack platform, and I was there during the surge in 2007 to 8. It was very, very active, and I had a lot of combat trauma that I was dealing with, and we had a lot of engagements, and I called for a lot of clearance of fires. And then in my own personal life, as I started experiencing setbacks and disappointments when I got back from Iraq, I got divorced. They found a tumor on my pituitary, I had brain surgery. My brother died in his sleep. Just a whole avalanche of things happened. And I started feeling the weight of karma, what I thought was karma. And I thought, gosh, I'm getting punished for the things that I did. And I mean, even though it was under orders, even though it was completely legally justified, as my own life started to deteriorate, these thoughts crept in and really, really tormented me. And I had a suicide attempt, a very violent suicide attempt. And then I was medevac to Walter Reed in 2015. And there I met a whole bunch of therapists, psychologists, mind-body therapists, social workers who helped me really work through my trauma and my depression, my regrets, and my resentments. And this one exercise a therapist did with me was I had a very violent engagement in Iraq that I really, really regretted for a lot of reasons. There was collateral damage with children involved. And in this one exercise, the therapist asked me to walk back that terrible event to its origin, to its, where did that experience originate? And it was fascinating to kind of distill down the infinite factors that contributed to me being at that particular grid square at that time and place. And I walked it all the way back, and I could have walked it all. I mean, everything could be walked back to our birth. I mean, and even probably before that. But that exercise, I walked it back to that thing, the flight examiner in the cockpit, because he could have said no. I mean, he could have said, "Hey, sorry, go become, a policeman, or, go become a adjutant general." But he gave me the pass. And so that's not to assign blame. And it's I was able to see the perfection of everything. And the fact that, where I was thinking everything had gone terribly and horribly wrong, that it really kind of like relaxing and taking a step back and watching the evolution, and to the extent that I could, really illustrated to me the perfection, that I was in exactly the right time and place, and doing exactly the right things, and that it's far more than I can imagine or even understand. And I just share that. I like to share that every chance I can get, because I think that that's true for all of us. And I mean, even being here and now, whatever led us to this moment in time, there's infinite number of factors and variables that could have gone either way. But we're sitting here for a reason. I believe it's a good reason. I believe it's important. And I can say that about most things in my life now. Some things are still hard to work through, the more tragic ones, the more disappointing ones, seeing the larger picture and understanding the difference between having a plan and being part of a plan. And, retiring medically a year ago, watching my career fall apart without my control, 14 years of service, and then being medically retired with a whole host of diagnoses that are hard to digest was demoralizing. But I try to hold on to that idea that no, I'm in the right time and place, and everything is happening exactly like it should, and there's something greater going on here. So I share that with you, take it with you, and make something of it. Thanks.